It is hard to believe, but after a Thanksgiving loss to the Dallas Cowboys, the Kansas City Chiefs look dead. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome into the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert. Who is that? The mastermind, Ross Jackson. On today's show, we are going to break down a great Thanksgiving day for the NFL. We're going to talk about Lamar Jackson just struggling with the Baltimore Ravens in a shocking loss to the Bengals. Talk about the Packers pulling off the sweep against the lost Detroit Lions. But we got to start again with the Kansas City Chiefs, who just look like they might be dead for the playoffs. Before we get into all of it, I do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen. And thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Ross, it is hard to believe for me when I see it, but the Chiefs are 9th in the standings after a loss to the Cowboys, and in that game, man, the Cowboys offense was just too good to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so weird now seeing graphics of the playoff hunt and seeing the Kansas City Chiefs in the hunt category, Tyler. This was an unexpected Thanksgiving treat for us all.
Yeah, I think it's pretty wild the way that it all turned out. And the thing is, you could kind of see it coming a little bit. I think most people expected this to be a competitive game. I liked Dallas plus 3.5 at home on yesterday's show. I'm going to give myself the check on that one because you figured it would be close, but you know, this looks closer than what the game actually was because 100%. Kansas City was able to score late. I just couldn't believe the amount of pressure that Dallas could get on Patrick Mahomes. He didn't look comfortable. He had four tutties on the day. It wasn't like he was terrible. But then in the run game, they just weren't consistent. Mahomes has 30 of their 119 yards, and they made so many mistakes, including penalties, which is what our guys over at the Locked On Chiefs Squad Show pointed out after the game.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, and it was just and we're going to talk about penalties later, but that was really the big storyline the first couple of drives where they went, they had 4 drives in a row where they punted the ball, all on the Dallas side of the field. But one of them's a 4th and 15, another one a 4th and 16. You can't really go for it in those situations. A little bit later, you have 4th and 5 and 4th and 4 still on the Dallas side, or at least close to the Dallas side of the field. Probably need to be a little bit more aggressive. But when you get in a situation where you have penalties, it just kills you, puts you behind the sticks. And granted, some of those penalties I don't know that I would agree with, but you got to find a way to overcome them. And Kansas City wasn't able to do that, and it just stalled out those drives.
In a do-or-die situation for Kansas City with the playoff picture like it is, for a championship-tested team to come out and have 10 penalties for, 120 yards out there, and for Dallas to be the more buttoned-up team, it was a shock for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there were a lot of times where the plays that we usually see go Kansas City's way didn't go their way. There was one drive on back-to-back plays. There should have been an interception. Ball gets batted up in the air. Dak Prescott goes diving to try to knock it down. It falls harmlessly to the ground, but it was a big hold-your-breath moment for all the Dallas Cowboys fans, I'm sure. And then the very next play, ball comes out, but then rolls out of bounds rolls into the arms of another Dallas Cowboy before the Kansas City Chiefs are able to dive on it. Typically, historically speaking, Kansas City comes up with those footballs. Those are plays that go their way. It's one of the reasons why they were 12-0 last year in one-score games. They're 1-6, all 6 losses of the season now on that exact category as well. So it's just one of those things where, hey, sometimes the ball doesn't always roll your way, and it certainly has not rolled the Kansas City Chiefs way this year the way that it did last year.
No, and that's the thing. Last year, and even the year before that, The year
Yeah,
before
true,
that was a
true.
similar thing where people were like, oh, the Chiefs aren't as good as they look. The Chiefs aren't as good as they look. They're winning these close games at the end. You know, it was magnified last year, but even the season before that, that was the narrative. Of course, they go on to actually win that year and then runner-up last year. But I think this season I had the Chiefs not winning their division. I thought the Broncos or the Chargers would step up, ultimately went with the Broncos. But the reason for that is because I think the Chiefs are a good team, but some of that luck will regress naturally. We'll see natural regression. And it's almost like you're going at such a high speed when you're the Chiefs and having all these deep playoff runs and everything like that, that once you do actually stop, it's like when you work. Ross, you and I have worked long hours, and hey, I know people have been discussing sports media, working on holidays. Me and Ross are incredibly grateful to be able to do this and have these conversations with you guys. Thank you for making Locked On NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network number one. But you and I have worked long hours and long days. And in that 16th, 17th, 18th hour, you may not feel tired. But then when you get home and you stop, you realize just how tired and exhausted, and it all hits you at once. And I feel like this season right now and what we're seeing from the Chiefs, a long explanation for it, but that effect is what we're seeing from the Chiefs, where everything is catching up to them right now, and they just don't have the juice.
Yeah, it very much feels like it. I think that's a really apt description of exactly what it is that Kansas City is dealing with right now. The good news for them is that they have the right guys leading the charge in terms of being able to maybe overcome that. But the clock is ticking. There's only a few weeks left in this NFL season, and we're at a point now where we're not just talking about Kansas City getting into the playoffs and not necessarily having a bye. We're talking about them on the outside looking in right now. Now, it's Kansas City. Right, and not close. And it's Kansas City. All they need to do is be there. And then all of a sudden they're going to, they have the ability to make that run. But as of right now, like it's uncharacteristic to say it, but it's true. Right now, the illness has taken hold to an effect to where they might not be present for the playoffs at this point. Now, I won't believe it until I see it, Tyler. We'll see what happens by the time that it's all said and done. We've seen these Kansas City Chiefs do something like this before, not to this extent, but to be counted out and then pop back in. But yeah, this is all new kind of uncharted territory for them.
What kind of makes me more, I don't want to say worried because I don't have a dog in the race with Kansas City per se, but what makes me more concerned that they are able to overcome this is next week they have a primetime game against the Houston Texans. And that Texans front seven, they are playing improved football. After that, they play the Chargers. And a lot of these teams, what I keep bringing up, a lot of these teams ahead of them, Jacksonville, the Chargers right now, they got another matchup. Buffalo, those teams beat them. They have the head-to-head tiebreaker over Kansas City. Their conference record is 3-4 right now. It's, Jacksonville 4-2, Chargers 6-2, Buffalo 4-3. Like, they don't have any shred of a tiebreaker whatsoever on any of these teams. But we could talk Kansas City all night long. We got to give credit to the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, how about that?
We're talking about the
Cowboys,
right? Still being in it. How can we look at the Cowboys and say they're not in it? And my guy Landon McCool from Locked On Cowboys was hype after the big win.
The Dallas Cowboys get a very happy Thanksgiving indeed as they finish their sweep of last year's Super Bowl participants, beating the Kansas City Chiefs 31-28. Hi, I'm Landon McCool with the Locked On Cowboys podcast, and the Dallas Cowboys keep their season alive with another impressive victory at home, beating Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs on Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. And getting an opportunity to continue to keep hope alive for the Cowboys season as they improve to 6-5-1, facing a limping Detroit Lions next week. And a chance to really kind of turn the season around in a way that you just did not expect when things were being shuffled around at the trade deadline. And now you see a Cowboys team that was able to make stops when they needed to, an offense that was dominant, and a team that nobody wants to see if they end up making the playoffs this year. For more on this, make sure you check out the Locked On Cowboys podcast, and for more on your team, check out the podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It's this simple. The offense is potent and the defense is improved.
Yep.
That's what I wrote in my notes when I was watching this game. I'm like, it's that simple. The problem is it might be too little too late. They're 6-5-1. And I think if they won out, Ross, if the Cowboys were able to win out and they have at the Lions next, then Minnesota, then the Chargers, the Commanders, the Giants. Like, if they can beat the Lions this week, I think that they are going to win out and they have a great chance to make it. Like, this was an impressive performance.
Yeah, big time. And look, that trade deadline really, really helped them out quite a bit, didn't it? I mean, my goodness, man, being able to get Quinnen Williams in there, who was such a big part of this victory as well, helping to take away some of the run game, this defense going out there and being opportunistic as well, and being able to get the ball back into the hands of what's worked all season, the Dallas Cowboys offense. For all the struggles they had early in the year, the offense was cooking. It was always the defense that was a concern. Now that that has kind of leveled out, all of a sudden, that's a threatening team with a pretty favorable schedule down the stretch. There's a couple of games in there, don't get me wrong, but a pretty favorable schedule nonetheless.
Yeah, no, they have a great opportunity to actually do the unthinkable here, and I think they have the talent now. That was a good trade. They are much better now on the defensive front and on defense in general than they were before, but we got to be honest, the guy that they traded away to be able to make those trades, his defense and his performance still pretty good too, because Micah Parsons helped swallow up the Detroit Lions. Green Bay Packers, big-time win, sweeping the Lions. It's Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game, you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who's going to score next, fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Again, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Ross, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL, breaking down the Thursday. It was Thursday, folks, but a pretty important Thursday, you could say, in Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving slate. We had great games all day long. The Chiefs looked dead. The Cowboys survived, but the Lions also looked very lost in their game to the Green Bay Packers. And the Packers, man, they were really, really impressive. And if you want to know why the Packers were able to win this game and sweep the Lions, well, my guy Peter Bukowski from Locked On Packers is ready to tell you.
It happened because Matt LaFleur decided to play aggressive. It was fourth downs. It was throwing the ball on early downs. It was giving Jordan Love every opportunity to go make plays. And boy, did Jordan Love make plays in this game. A pair of fourth down touchdowns, the 51-yarder on a deep ball to Christian Watson, and then it was the clincher on fourth and short to Dontavian Wicks. And you didn't have to do that. You could have punted it and said, trust your defense. That's what you do when you trust your defense. Matt LaFleur trusted his defense by saying, we're going to go to win the game right here. One play to win the game, and our guys are going to do it. Jordan Love was spectacular, and then Micah Parsons, yet again. He's the closer. He is Mariano Rivera for the Green Bay Packers. 2.5 sacks in this game, and the crucial sack on Jared Goff late in the red zone to force the Lions to kick a field goal. The Packers get the win, and they are now in pole position in the NFC North.
I took the Packers plus 2.5. I like the Packers to win the game outright. At the end of the day, I don't trust either unit on the Detroit Lions right now, which is crazy to say. And I do trust the defense of the Green Bay Packers. And we could give love to Jordan Love, and I'm sure that we will. He got his turkey leg. They owed him a turkey leg, and he got his turkey leg. But, man, that Green Bay Packers defense, and I think this year around the NFL is kind of a bigger stylistic topic. Defenses are more important than ever this year. The run game, the NFL is a pendulum. It swings back and forth, and we are seeing the swing back towards running the ball. Last year, we saw running the ball
Yep.
against 2 high coverage shells. This year, we're seeing 3 tight end sets, 13 personnel. We're seeing 6 offensive lineman sets from teams all over the NFL so that you can guarantee that you can run the ball against these 2 high defensive looks. We're seeing the pendulum swing back the other way right now in the NFL, and I think that the Packers defense is going to make them a contender. Like, this is why everybody thinks the Packers are as good as we think they are, even if we can't trust them, because they do stuff like this, and this is why they're still a Super Bowl contender.
And they remain ahead of the curve on all of this, by the way. They were early to the multi-tight end sets on the offensive side.
Because Matt LaFleur is a good
Because
coach. It's
exactly
crazy.
right.
Ross, I got to say this. I'm sorry.
Yeah, please.
My dad's a big-time Packers fan, has been since the 60s. We're sitting there for Thanksgiving, and he's just complaining up a storm about Matt LaFleur. I've seen, I've seen Pete do shorts about Matt LaFleur's job status, and Packers fans are, this guy is a great coach, man. He may have gotten a little conservative at times this year, but insane. Matt LaFleur was great in this game.
Yeah, 100%. And they've been ahead on all of this stuff. The multiple tight ends on the field, multiple running backs on the field. When defenses were starting to get super light, Matt LaFleur and those Green Bay Packers were getting heavier on the offensive side. It's the ebb and flow of the NFL. And now you're watching them get ahead of the curve over on the defensive side as well, adding a guy like Micah Parsons. And look, it was the pressures. He had 10 of them. It were the sacks, 2.5, including a crucial sack, but also that defense standing up to force 2 turnovers on downs at times that were otherwise touchdowns for the Detroit Lions. Detroit started to get on a little bit of a roll, but they interrupted that, taking the ball away on turnover and downs twice in this game and taking advantage of that aggressive style that Dan Campbell brings as the decision maker, figurehead, and head coach for the Detroit Lions. And so Green Bay being able to stand up to all of that, I think, is what absolutely helped them be able to close out this game, in addition to what they're able to do on the offensive side.
And Ross, you know what? It's hilarious how the same thing that can make you a hero is the same thing that can make you a zero. And now everybody's mad at Dan Campbell for going for it on 4th down all the time when they're not getting it and stuff like that. And they schemed up a perfect play. Jamison Williams drops that one in the 4th quarter. You know what I mean? And yet Dan Campbell is going to keep taking those rips and taking those rips and taking those rips, because if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, and you're wrong, and that's kind of how it goes. But it's clear that Dan Campbell is not as good of an offensive play caller as Ben Johnson, and that offense has had weird pockets of inconsistency, and all the talk can be about Dan Campbell, and I think that's fair. But you know what the real problem is? That offensive line is not performing the way that it has, whether it's, a guy like Taylor Decker getting older, being banged up, a guy like Frank Ragnow, who retired before the season. But good news for the Lions, Ragnow is on his way back, according to my guy Matt Derry from Locked On Lions.
Happy Franksgiving, everybody. How about this? Frank Ragnow coming out of retirement. The Lions Pro Bowl and All-Pro center, who retired before the season, is coming out of retirement, and reports say he'll be back in time for next Thursday's game against the Dallas Cowboys. Huge news for this O-line that needs Ragnow back. Now, Dan Campbell had said weeks ago, when asked about if he had heard anything about a Frank Ragnow comeback, he said no, that Frank was retired and happy not playing, and they hadn't heard anything. But the Lions' interior of their offensive line has really struggled. Graham Glasgow has struggled at center. Now the news today that Frank Ragnow coming out of retirement and expected to return next Thursday against the Cowboys. Matt Derry, Locked On Lions. Huge breaking news. Check us out wherever you get your podcasts, of course, on the #1 sports podcast network.
So the Lions fortify that interior offensive line. That has always been their big advantage. That has been their big bullet that they had, is our offensive line is going to bully your defensive line, and we will win every game because we can go on 4th down all the time, because we know we have the #1 most important advantage you can have outside a quarterback in the NFL right now, and that's a good offensive line.
Yep, it's always the piece for them.
If they can get Ragnow back and turn it around, then great. But Ross, you start to look at their position in the NFC. They're 8th now at 7-5. 49ers, Packers, Seahawks. I mean, the Packers and the Seahawks, there's no way they are going to fall out of this. I just can't believe that. I don't have a way to believe that. And then the Lions play the Cowboys next week. We know that's a tougher game than maybe it looked like a couple weeks ago. Then they're at the Rams. Then the Steelers. They finish at the Bears in Chicago. I don't think – I'm going to say it. The Lions aren't making the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough for them. I mean, look, getting a guy like Frank Ragnow back has endless advantages for them. But we talked about too little, too late for a team like the Dallas Cowboys. How about too little, too late for the Detroit Lions right here? Right. Like it's going to be a tough situation for them to be able to kind of make themselves pick up some of that kind of close that gap a little bit in what has been a really challenging NFC at the top of the NFC. And now that they've fallen back in the division with Green Bay, that's not going to help them get any closer at this point.
And one other thing to consider here, we talk about, Micah Parsons, 2.5 sacks, dominant. You trust the Packers defense. They're a really good defense. We talk about how, the Detroit Lions offensive line hasn't been as good as they've been in recent years, but the Lions defensive line, where was Aiden Hutchinson in this game? I am someone who's guilty of this as well, I will say, but I have said that, Aiden Hutchinson should have been the number 1 pick, better than Travon Walker, but I don't know that that's as clear as it has been before. Travon Walker's a guy who, because he's on Jacksonville and they've been up and down as a team, hasn't quite gotten the attention that maybe he's deserved as a number 1 overall pick. But I think the reality is Aiden Hutchinson has beat up on some really bad teams and bad tackles. And in some of these big performances here in these bigger games, you haven't seen him as much. So he's somebody who needs to step up for them here down the stretch if they're going to turn this around, because they could not get any pressure on Jordan Love, and he just cut them apart.
Yeah, you got to win in the trenches. And if you're not able to do that, you're not going to win football games. Tyler, I just went ahead going back to the offensive line in the return of Frank Ragnow, just looking at on-off splits for him when he's on the field versus when he's off the field. Only a 2%, less than a 2% difference in terms of pressure allowed when he's off the field, and less than a 2% difference in sack percentage, which is a little bit more substantial in that situation when he's off the field. So pressure still a problem in the last couple of years with them on the field versus off the field. And then, how that translates in terms of the sack side of it. You're thinking about a Jared Goff that's a year older now at this point that might not be able to get away or stay up or get the ball out quickly, all those other things. So what impact he has remains to be seen.
It's a give and take. When you have a guy like Jared Goff, because he doesn't play make, he doesn't have that ability in his game. Well, if you take scheme from 10 to 8, and you take O-line play from 10 to 8, and you lose Amon-Ra St. Brown in the middle of the game or early in the game, all of a sudden Jared Goff's margin of error goes down. You know what I mean? It's now we don't have such a perfect environment where we don't require you to help us. Now they're in a place, it seems lately, where they do need him to help them and make that extra play and elevate and blah, 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 and he just doesn't have that to him. And somebody who does have that quality but hasn't shown it as of late is Lamar Jackson. And the Baltimore Ravens get shocked by the Cincinnati Bengals to ruin their win streak. And all of a sudden, the AFC North is back up in the air. All right, football fans, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL. We talked about the Kansas City Chiefs and them looking kind of dead in the water at this time, where the Cowboys are still trying to stay alive. The Packers sweep the Lions, putting the Lions situation definitely in flux, to say the least. But speaking of flux, man, the AFC North gets crazier and crazier as the Bengals go in and knock off the Baltimore Ravens. Before we dive in, I do want to thank you again for making Locked On NFL your first listen, and thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. But my guy Jake Liscow from Locked On Bengals talked about how crazy it was to win this game. And look, who would have thought? All it took was getting a superstar quarterback back in the lineup.
Turns out all the Cincinnati Bengals needed this whole time was, well, their franchise quarterback. Joe Burrow returns, and the Bengals take care of business with 5 takeaways from the Baltimore Ravens in a game where Lamar Jackson, to me, frankly, looked awful, and Joe Burrow knocked the rust off. It's just too bad about what's happened over the last 9 weeks for the Bengals, winning just 1 game between Joe Burrow's starts, between Jake Browning and Joe Flacco efforts, and a defense that looked like it could have been one of the worst ever. The last couple of weeks, a different story for this defense. And obviously, while Joe Burrow looked good, especially in the second half of his return, and the Bengals offense did enough, the Bengals defense really taking advantage of Baltimore mistakes in this one. And technically, now they're not out of it. It gets harder from here, Buffalo and Baltimore again, but the Bengals and Joe Burrow keep their season alive.
9-8 is not getting in the playoffs. I'm
No,
sorry.
not
No,
getting
they
in
are
there.
out of it. They are out of it. I mean, you could say mathematically, whatever, but like if you're a Bengals fan who's like, you never know, we could run the table. Even if you run the table and go 9-8, you're not making the playoffs. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That ain't happening. It's not making sense. But Joe Burrow is very good at football, and the Bengals defense way better than they were early in the season. Like Aaron Schatz does the DVOA and all that different stuff. They have literally been the lowest rated defense in the history of the ranking on DVOA so far through this season. So for the Bengals defense to play the way that it played last week against the Patriots, come out here and force this many turnovers, and even without the turnovers, they played pretty good defense against the Ravens overall. If you're a Bengals fan, I guess you have to be encouraged, but I have a hard time looking at the injury risk to Burrow the rest of the way, the draft pick getting even worse if you reel off 1 or 2 wins here. I just have a hard time looking at this as anything other than just another wasted year for the Bengals.
Yeah, it's so clear that this Bengals team needs to invest in certain areas around Joe Burrow in order to make sure that they are maximizing the window that they have left with him. They need to be ready to have answers in case Trey Hendrickson walks, or let's be real, when Trey Hendrickson walks this offseason, right? Like you have to be ready for that to be a reality. And so you've got to be ready to be able to build all those assets around. I almost think that, it's great that they went out there and they won. They gave their fans something awesome to cheer for on Thanksgiving Day. But I almost felt like, man, don't even risk Joe Burrow anymore throughout the rest of the season. That's what I've been saying. Yeah, let him chill, let him, be ready. And then build your sense for optimism going into 2026 with a clear vision for your future. Now, asking the Cincinnati Bengals to have a clear vision for their future is not always it's not always the greatest thing, but I almost think it was more risky to play them. But look, they come off with a win. They get to ride high. If they do even so much as win out or win a few more games for the rest of this year, I agree. They're probably not making the playoffs, but fans are feeling really good going into 2026, and hopefully they remain at least in some type of draft situation here to where they can still get somebody on either side of the football. You got to think offensive line, you got to think defense, of course, when it comes to this team, but finding players over on either side of those trenches to be able to help this team out in 2026.
Yeah, they need some big improvements, and that's the problem. Is now you're going to win some games, you're going to get a lesser draft pick, and we've seen the Bengals have to take some chances on some riskier prospects, some project picks because they're just a little too far back and things like that. So it'll be an interesting offseason for the Cincinnati Bengals.
All I can think of right now is give me a project pick.
Yeah. Classic line.
Literally all that's in my head right now.
That's the Cincinnati Bengals right then and there. But moving to the other side, the Ravens, what a shocker that they lost this football game after winning 5 games in a row. Looked like they were turning things all the way back around. They were just going to run away with the division. Everybody thought that they would come back and win the division. They were the favorites to win the division when they were 3-5 and everything like that. But after this loss, it's not as, easy for them to run away with it. The Steelers ahead of them right now, taking it back. Now the Bengals are at 4-8. I guess they have another game against the Bengals in 2 weeks. Maybe the Bengals could come back and win that division. I think it's absolutely insane that they will. It's just not likely to do it. But I thought that Baltimore was going to be in a pretty good spot to run away and win the division. But with this loss, the Bengals give them problems. Like, the Ravens just aren't playing good football. Lamar Jackson was terrible in this game. Like, the defense, we thought it was all fixed. It's not fixed. The Bengals just always take them to task. I said it for a couple of weeks now when it seemed obvious that the Ravens were going to make this run and get back in it. I don't care if they win 11 straight games and make the playoffs. I do not trust this Ravens team. They've just beat a bunch of bad teams for the most part, other than the Bears, who they beat with a backup. That was a crazy game. Congrats. Good win there, but I do not trust this Ravens team no matter how many games they win, if they make the playoffs or not. They're losing round 1. Don't buy it.
Yeah, it's hard to trust them. I will say I thought Lamar Jackson played well up to a point. If Isaiah Likely doesn't fumble a ball out of bounds on a touchdown that he could have walked in on, if Zay Flowers doesn't push off on a touchdown on a perfectly
that was a bad
pass,
call.
It was a bad call. It was a very bad call. But if look, you know that you might get called for something like that, and so you got to play a little bit more careful. But in any case, if those plays fall in line, I think Baltimore runs away with this one. And Lamar Jackson did everything that he needed to do up to that point. But then the turnovers started to pile up. And anytime that you you fall back on a 5-0, 5-1 turnover ratio, you're not winning that football game. And so I agree that he didn't play well, and he didn't play well enough to dig them out of a rut. But I thought that what he was doing in the early portions of that game, up until everything started to kind of get away from them, was excellent. I thought that he played a good game. But the issue has always been with Lamar Jackson that when it rains, it pours. And that's and right now, as he's coming back from this injury, he doesn't seem like he has that full maybe mobility there, whether it's the mental side of it or the physical side of it. He just doesn't have that get out of jail free card or that easy button anymore, or at this time. And so I think because of that, you saw some things kind of stockpile on him. And from that perspective, I think that's still one of those remaining deficiencies in Lamar Jackson's game, is that the game gets away from him pretty quickly once things aren't going his way. You'd like to see that get better, but at this point, at 28 years old, are you really going to see it get any better as he moves forward? So that's going to be a big question mark for him. But now the Ravens are going to be gridlocked yet again in this AFC North with the Pittsburgh Steelers fighting for the top of that division.
And I think one thing to consider here is that their offensive line isn't as good as it was last year either. They have not been performing as well. And, like we talked about the Lions, and if you have a banged up Lamar Jackson that doesn't want to run as much or experiences pain when he's running, or just, whatever reason, subconscious.
Or just doesn't trust it, whatever.
He stayed in the pocket a ton tonight and sailed some passes late and things like that. And you don't want to excuse all bad play for injuries. Injury rate's 100% in the NFL. Everyone's banged up, but it's fair to wonder over the last 3 weeks, we just haven't seen the Lamar that we're used to. And you wonder if we are going to see that Lamar this year, if he does have a knee, a hamstring, a foot, all the things, an ankle, all the things that you hear about might be bothering him, which he's playing coy, which I get it. He's a warrior, doesn't want to act like I'm hurt, invite the defense and all that. But, it did not look like the explosive Lamar that we're used to.
Yeah, hard to be worried about inviting a defense when you're putting on tape what you're putting on tape, which is that once you get on the slide, you can't stop. And I think that's the most concerning thing that he's putting on tape on the mental acuity side of the game and on the mental side of the game in terms of mental fortitude. The dude's intelligent. He can play the game like crazy. There's no question about any of that. But when it comes down to just the fortitude of make a mistake and move on, the issue is that it typically compounds for him. And putting that on tape to me is way more concerning than anything else that we've seen from him.
No, you're 100% right. And one last note, I want to say Joseph Assad, number 58 from the Cincinnati Bengals, had a great football game out there. Most people know him and remember him for getting the late hit against Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs that ended the Bengals' chance of winning one of those games. Often in sports, we forget that stuff eventually, but that was a very low point. He tore his ACL at one point. That's a guy who's battled through a lot. And, to see him get back and make big plays in a big game for his team, I don't know. That just stood out to me because I remember the conversation about him and things said about him after he made a critical mistake. Good on him for bouncing back and making plays. But that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On NFL. Hope you guys all had a happy Thanksgiving. I am your host, the Madman Tyler Rowland, for my co-host, the Mastermind Ross Jackson. As we always tell you, thanks for tuning in and stay safe out there.